This is the story of David Ellison Hart and his wife Nora Calloway Hart. They had been married for 19 years when the marriage began to feel like furniture, present, functional, taken entirely for granted. David was a man who expressed love through provision and constancy, believing that showing up reliably, year after year, was its own language. Nora had once believed the same, or told herself she did, until the quieter voice began suggesting that constancy was simply another word for invisibility. Between them lived their 15-year-old son, Owen, who watched his parents the way children always watch, carefully, and without saying so. What would unravel was not a single act of betrayal so much as a long series of small permissions Nora granted herself, each one rationalized, each one nudging her further from the woman who had once reached for David's hand in the dark without thinking. The theme of this story is not infidelity. It is the story of a person who confused being unhappy with being wronged. The house on Mercer Street had a rhythm. David left at 7:15. Nora made coffee that she drank standing at the kitchen window, watching the neighbor's dog nose through the flower bed. Owen caught the bus at 7:40, backpack half unzipped, still chewing toast. By 8, the house was hers, and she moved through it like a woman who had memorized every room so thoroughly that she no longer saw any of them. She worked remotely, freelance content strategy for a mid-size marketing firm, which meant her days were self-structured and, more often than she admitted, self-interrupted. She was good at her work in the way that competent, underestimated people often are, efficiently, invisibly, without credit that felt proportional. David worked in civil infrastructure. He managed projects, bridges, drainage systems, the unglamorous skeleton of cities. He was not a man given to describing his work with passion. When people asked what he did, he said, "City planning, more or less," and left it there. He was thorough, unhurried, and difficult to rattle. These were qualities Nora had once found grounding. Lately they felt like a wall she kept pressing her palms against. On a Tuesday in late October, David came home at 6:30 with Thai food in a paper bag. He set it on the counter, kissed Nora on the side of the head, the way a person sets down their keys, automatically, without ceremony. She was already at the table with her laptop open. "Owen eat?" he asked. "He had cereal around 5. He's upstairs." David unpacked the containers. He called up to Owen. Owen appeared, took his food without much conversation, and returned to his room. This was ordinary. They did not comment on it. At the table, David and Nora ate and talked about a water main project that was running over schedule, about whether Owen needed new cleats, about a streaming series Nora had started and David had not. The conversation was not unpleasant. It had the easy, slightly hollow quality of two people who have learned to fill silence without filling it with anything real. Afterward, David cleared the table. Nora went back to her laptop. When he sat beside her on the sofa later, she was aware of his presence, the way you are aware of a lamp, peripherally, without looking directly. She had been emailing someone, a man named Patrick Voss, who worked for one of her client companies and had begun writing to her first about a project timeline and then, gradually, about other things. He had a way of asking questions that felt like genuine interest. He asked about her opinion on things. He remembered details she had mentioned in passing. She did not think of it as anything. This was true, in the beginning. That night, lying beside David, she listened to him breathe into sleep the way she had 10,000 times before. The room was the same as it always was. The small digital clock read 11,007. She was wide awake. She thought about something Patrick had said. "You seem like someone who thinks harder than most people give you credit for." And the warmth that had moved through her at reading it. It was not a remarkable sentence, but something about being seen, or the sensation of it, lingered longer than it should have. She turned away from David. She didn't reach for his hand. The small thing, the hairline crack, happened 3 weeks later on a Friday night. Owen was at a friend's house. David and Nora had the evening to themselves, which used to mean something. Nora had made pasta. They opened wine. For a while it was almost like earlier years. A little loose, talking more easily. David laughed at something she said, and she felt briefly, sharply, how much she wanted to feel that more. Then she said, trying to keep her voice light, "Do you ever feel like we just go through it, like we're very good roommates?" David looked at her. Not defensively. He considered it the way he considered most things, with that unhurried steadiness that had once felt like safety. "I think all long marriages have seasons like that," he said. "I don't think it means anything permanent." She nodded. She picked up her wine. What she wanted him to say, though she could not have articulated it then, was something like, "That scares me. Tell me what you need." She wanted the question to land in him as an emergency. It hadn't. She put her glass down and said, "You're probably right." She smiled. He smiled back. They finished dinner and watched television and went to bed. She opened her phone under the blanket and typed a message to Patrick Voss. She told him the pasta had come out well. He replied that she deserved a proper dinner out. She laughed silently at her phone in the dark. Beside her, David was already asleep. December moved in early, the cold arriving before the calendar agreed to it. Nora started her mornings differently, checking her phone before getting out of bed, reading Patrick's messages first, as if they were news she needed before the day could begin. She understood what this meant in one part of herself. In another part, she had erected careful language. They were friends. She was lonely. Nothing had happened. Nothing would happen. She was simply someone whose emotional needs had not been met for a long time, and who had found, without planning to, a small warm room of being understood. She rehearsed this language when the other part grew louder. Patrick lived 40 minutes away. He was divorced, 2 years out of a marriage that had, by his account, ended quietly and without malice. He was the kind of man who said things like, "I take full responsibility for my part in it," in a way that sounded considered rather than performed. He was attentive. He remembered. He followed up. They had met twice in person, once for coffee in November, which Nora told herself was professional, and once for lunch in December, which she told herself was the same. She did not mention either meeting to David. At home, she had become more irritable. At small things, at the slight disorder of the kitchen after David cooked, at the way he would sometimes start a sentence and not finish it, assuming she understood. She caught herself manufacturing grievances, cataloging them, stacking them like evidence. She knew what she was doing. She didn't stop. David noticed the temperature change. He was not an unobservant man. He simply processed slowly and preferred to gather before acting. One evening he came into the kitchen where she was working and said, "Are you all right? Lately you seem—" He paused, searching for the right word in his careful way. "Somewhere else." "I'm just tired," Nora said, not looking up. "Work's been more intense." He stood there for a moment. Then he nodded, got himself water, and left. She watched him go and felt something, not guilt exactly, but its quieter cousin, discomfort at her own capacity for ordinariness in the face of what she was doing. She had told him the truth once. She was tired. She was somewhere else. But not the way he thought. That same week, Owen asked at dinner why she seemed stressed. 15-year-olds were frequently uncanny in this way, asking the direct question that adults circled indefinitely. "I'm fine, baby," she said. "Just a lot going on." "You seem annoyed at Dad," Owen said, not unkindly. "Just observational." David looked up from his plate. "I'm not," Nora said. "We're fine." David said nothing. He returned to his food, but she caught it. The slight press of his jaw, the way he set down his fork with more care than necessary. He was filing the moment away. She knew his habits. After Owen went upstairs, David washed dishes and Nora dried. They worked in silence. Not an angry silence, a careful one, the kind that exists when two people are both waiting for the other to say the real thing. He spoke first. "If something's bothering you, you can tell me." "Nothing's bothering me." "Okay." The word was soft, not an acceptance, a withdrawal. She put the last dish away. She thought about Patrick, who had asked her that morning what she was afraid of. She had typed back, "More than I can list," and he had responded, You should be around people who make you feel brave instead. She had read it 4 times. She hung up the dish towel and told David she was going to bed early. He said good night without turning around. 2 days later, she agreed to meet Patrick on a Saturday afternoon. She told David she was meeting a former colleague for coffee. He said, "Have fun. The way people say things, they believe entirely." She sat across from Patrick for 2 hours in a cafe. He reached across the table once and touched her hand briefly, just a moment, just fingers over knuckles, and she did not move her hand away. On the drive home, she felt sick and alive in equal measure. She gripped the wheel. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself she had been faithful, technically. She told herself a lot of things. What she did not do was tell David any of them. It was a dinner in January. The 3 of them at the kitchen table, a Wednesday. Nora did not know she was about to change things. She thought she was making conversation. Owen had been quiet, the particular quiet of a teenager processing something. He had a friend at school, he said, whose parents were separating. He said it the way teenagers report news, declarative, watching for reaction. "That's hard," David said. "His mom says it's better than staying unhappy," Owen said. A pause. Then Nora said, reaching for the bread, "She's right. Sometimes it's okay to walk away. No one should stay in an unhappy marriage." It landed casually. Nora was looking at the bread when she said it, but David was looking at her. Owen nodded thoughtfully, chewing. The conversation moved on. David asked about a history test. Owen said it went fine. That was all. But later that night, David sat at the kitchen table long after Nora had gone upstairs. He sat with a glass of water he didn't drink. He turned the moment over slowly, the way he turned all things, without rushing, without wanting to be wrong. He thought about the past 3 months, the distance, the phone she angled away, the lunch she'd come home from with her eyes slightly too bright, talking a little too quickly about traffic on the return route. He thought about the way she'd said no one should stay in an unhappy marriage without looking at their son when she said it, which meant she wasn't really talking to their son. He didn't sleep much that night. He didn't confront her immediately. That was not his way. He needed to be sure, and he needed to be calm, because he understood that what he said in the next several days would matter permanently. He found the messages 4 days later, not by snooping. Her laptop was open on the counter, and a notification came through while he was standing beside it. He saw enough. A name he didn't recognize, language that was not friendly, language that was intimate, in the careful way of people who tell themselves they've done nothing wrong. He closed the laptop. He made coffee. He went to work. He came home that evening after Owen was in bed. Nora was reading on the sofa. She looked up. Something in his face made her set the book down. "Who was Patrick Voss?" he said. She went still in the particular way of a person whose prepared story suddenly needs to be selected and arranged. He watched it happen. "He's someone from one of my client companies," she said. "We've been in contact about a project. I saw the messages, Nora." She didn't ask which ones or how. She looked at her hands. The silence was considerable. "Nothing physical has happened," she said finally. Her voice was even. This was not a lie, and they both understood that it was also not the point. "I know," David said. "I've been..." She paused. "I've been really lonely, for a long time." "I believe you." She looked up. She seemed almost surprised by this, that he didn't argue it, didn't defend himself, didn't fill the air with his own grievance. "I'm not trying to excuse it," she said, "but I need you to understand that I felt invisible. I've felt invisible for years. I understand that you felt that way." "David, I'm not saying you're wrong about feeling it." His voice was quiet. It didn't waver. "I'm saying I didn't know. And I'm saying you could have told me, and you didn't. You chose this instead." She looked at him for a long time. "I didn't choose anything," she said. You chose not to tell me you were lonely. You chose to tell him." She had nothing to say to that, because it was precise. He stood up after a moment. He told her he was going to sleep in the guest room for now. She asked if he wanted to talk more. He said not tonight. He asked her, and this was the part she would return to later, his particular calmness in that moment, to please not speak to Owen about any of this until they had a plan. She said okay. He went to bed. She sat alone in the living room for a long time. She had expected anger. She had expected, somewhere underneath everything, to be fought for in the loud way of a man who could not bear to lose. Instead, she had been handed something much harder to hold: his disappointment, his clarity, his refusal to make it messy. She thought about calling Patrick. She didn't. The divorce papers arrived on a Thursday in March. A courier, her name on the envelope. She stood in the front hallway in her socks and opened it with the mechanical focus of someone trying to stay steady. And then she sat down on the bottom stair because her legs had simply decided. David had moved to an apartment 12 minutes away in February, after 2 weeks of the guest room, quiet separate mornings, and one session with a couples therapist that had lasted 45 minutes before Nora said she needed time to think about what she wanted. She had not thought David would move as quickly as he did. She had thought the limbo would stretch, that he would wait in it with her. He had not waited. Owen knew the shape of it now, that his parents were separating, that his father had an apartment he could visit, that things were changing without anyone being cast as the cause. David had been careful about this. Nora had been surprised by how carefully he'd protected Owen from the narrative she'd half expected him to deploy. He hadn't told Owen about Patrick. He'd simply said that he and his mother had become unhappy in ways they hadn't handled well. She told herself he was building a case, that his restraint was strategic, that he was performing the role of reasonable man for an audience. But this reading of him required her to believe he was something he had never shown her evidence of being, and somewhere beneath her self-protective story she knew this. She called Patrick that Thursday evening. They had spoken less frequently since January. The discovery had shaken something loose in her, and she had half withdrawn without saying so. When she told him about the papers, there was a pause on his end, and then he said, "Wow, that's a big step. Not come to me. Not let me be there. Just wow. That's a big step." She noticed it. She filed it. She said she was okay and ended the call after 20 minutes. Over the following weeks, she moved through a series of internal adjustments, the way a person resets posture after being told they've been standing wrong. She told her closest friend, Diane, that David had been emotionally unavailable for years, that she had tried, that the separation was mutual. Diane, who loved Nora but knew her, said, "What happened exactly?" in the careful way of someone who already has a partial answer. Nora gave her the version that held together in daylight. She registered that Owen was quieter on the weeks he stayed with her. He was not unkind. He did his homework and cleared his dishes and sometimes sat with her watching television with the specific softness of a boy trying not to make things harder. But she felt the space where his uncomplicated ease had been. He looked at her sometimes in a way she couldn't categorize, not judgment, not quite confusion, something more like watchfulness. He had heard her say that no one should stay in an unhappy marriage. He had watched his father leave without theatrics. Children understand more from sequence than from explanation. By May, she and Patrick had not met in person for 6 weeks. His messages had thinned, still warm, still interested, but at lower frequency, with greater gaps. She did not ask about it directly. She was afraid of what directness would clarify. Then in June, on a Sunday, he told her that he'd been spending time with someone else, someone from his own city, someone he'd known before. He said it gently. He said he valued Nora enormously. He said he hoped they stayed friends. She sat with her phone on her kitchen counter for a very long time. The house was quiet. Owen was at David's for the week. She had a full Sunday ahead of her, the long, unstructured kind she had once described to Patrick as suffocating, the way a full, free day could feel like reproach. She had wanted to be chosen. That was the interior truth she'd been circling for months. Not Patrick specifically, the feeling he represented, of being looked at fully, of mattering acutely, of being someone's most urgent thought. She realized in the kitchen, in the June quiet, that she had not been happy in her marriage. She also realized she had not been as unhappy as she'd concluded. She had been unexamined. She had reached toward the nearest available warmth and told herself it was justice. She didn't call anyone. She made tea. She sat at the table. She thought about David, not with longing exactly, but with the particular grief of understanding someone more clearly once they are absent. She thought about what she would say to him. A met in September at a coffee shop equidistant from their 2 apartments, a practical choice. Owen's school schedule requiring occasional logistics discussions in person. Nora had suggested coffee rather than a doorstep exchange. David had agreed without comment. He was already there when she arrived, at a corner table with his coffee, reading something on his phone that he said face down when he saw her. He looked well, not triumphantly well, not in the way of a man performing recovery. Just quietly, genuinely settled in his own presence in a way she recognized as new. He had always been steady. This was different. This was at peace, and peace was something he had found on the other side of something without her. She sat down. She ordered tea. For a few minutes they talked about Owen, a history project, a weekend trip David was planning with him, a tension with a friend group at school that Owen had mentioned. They talked like competent co-parents, which they had learned painfully and practically to be. Then Nora set down her cup. "I want to say something," she said, "if that's okay." David looked at her without wariness. "Okay." "I'm not." She stopped. Started again. "I'm not asking for anything. I want you to know that before I say it. I'm not asking you to reconsider. I know where we are." He nodded. "I made choices that I told myself were justified. I had a whole architecture built for why I deserved what I was doing." She turned her cup in her hands. "And I still think some of what was underneath it was real. I was lonely. I did feel invisible. I think that was true." "I think it probably was," David said. "But I used it as permission for things that weren't permissions to take." She met his eyes. "I know you know that. I'm saying I know it too now. I'm not asking you to, I don't need you to say anything about it. I just needed to say it to your face." David was quiet for a moment. He looked out the window at the street, the September afternoon, a woman walking a dog past the glass. "I appreciate that," he said. And he meant it. She could hear the absence of performance in it. "Are you," she began, "are you all right?" "Not asking I mean genuinely." "I am," he said. "More than I thought I would be, back in February." A small pause. "I was angrier than I showed you. I want you to know that. Not to relitigate anything, just because I think you deserve to see it, and I kept it too close." She nodded. She had suspected this. Knowing it made her feel something closer to respect for him than she'd felt in years. The conversation moved toward its end, the way honest conversations do, without a dramatic peak, without resolution that felt manufactured. They talked about Christmas arrangements. They talked about whether Owen might want a driving lesson before summer. Ordinary things. In the new ordinary they were building. At the door, putting on her coat, Nora said, "I keep thinking about what I said at dinner, in January, to Owen." David looked at her. "About walking away," she said. He didn't say anything immediately. He thought about it in the way she had watched him think about things for 19 years, without rushing, taking the weight of it seriously. "He asked me about it," David said, "a few weeks after I moved out. He asked me why I left when I'm the one who always talks about staying with things." Nora went still. "I told him," David said, "that sometimes walking away is right, and that the only way to know the difference is to be honest, with yourself and with the other person. That the walking away isn't the hard part. The honesty is the hard part." She thought about that. What did he say? He said, "Mom said the same thing about walking away, but it didn't feel the same when you said it." The words moved through her slowly. She didn't speak. David put on his coat. He picked up his keys from the counter. He looked at her once more, not with resentment, not with the cold satisfaction of a man who has been proven right, just with the even, tired, clear-eyed look of someone who has lived through something and come out the other side of it. Still recognizably himself. "You taught him it was okay to walk away," David said quietly. "I think you were right. I think walking away can be okay. I just think it depends on what you're walking toward." He said goodbye. He walked out into the September afternoon. Nora stood at the door of the coffee shop for a moment. Through the glass she watched him reach his car, open the door, and drive away without looking back at the window. He had never been a man who looked back. She had mistaken this for years for indifference. She understood now that it was its own kind of faith, the faith of a person who believes in the direction they are moving. She stood there another moment. Then she pushed open the door and walked out into the afternoon, into the particular loneliness of a life that had not collapsed so much as quietly rearranged itself around the shape of a decision she could not take back. Owen was right. His father had said the same words. It hadn't felt the same. Some lessons arrive with the authority of someone who has earned them. Others arrive as permission we grant ourselves, dressed in the borrowed clothes of wisdom. She had known the difference somewhere all along.